Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Season 1 finale of Working Class Hollywood. As I mentioned in last week's episode, I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break, a hiatus, because I'm starting production on Vanderpump Rules Season 8, which will keep me way too busy during the summer to give the attention and time that I need to keep pumping out these podcast interviews. But I will be back in the fall. I'll start publishing again in September or early October. So it's more important now than ever for you to subscribe to the podcast so you get the alerts when I start putting the shows up online again in the fall. So subscribe to the show, go to iTunes or Spotify and hit that subscribe button. Also, do me a favor, go on and rate the podcast, fill in those empty stars, and also write a review. Let me know what you think. It's very helpful to the show, and also it'll keep you connected, so when I'm back, you'll know when the shows are coming out. I have some ideas for the format of the podcast that I'll be implementing in Season 2 to make it bigger and better and more entertaining for everybody. I'm also working on launching a website, which will have some cool bonus content for each of the episodes, so stay tuned. There will be more episodes. I just got to take a little break to focus on my day job. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really do appreciate it, and let's get to the show. Welcome to Working Class Hollywood, conversations with people that make the movies, TV shows, and entertainment you love. If you're looking to break into or move up in the entertainment industry, or you're just a fan of content and want to hear about how it's made, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Jeremiah Smith.
Marvel Studios was just a twinkle in Marvel's eye at that point. And so I did. I went in, I met a couple people at Marvel, and they were kind enough to engage me. My thinking at that point was, okay, I'll go in. I'll try it 6 months. And 6 months went by, and now it's 11 years.
My guest today is Vice President of Physical Production at Marvel Studios, David Grant. David is part of the team at Marvel that oversees their films from beginning to end. He is on the team that helps budget the films, and he helps hire all the department heads. He's making decisions about where they're going to shoot the movies, how they're going to shoot the movies, and he really is part of the team that brings these amazing movies that we love so much to life. David is a very, very nice guy. He's very smart, and he has a great origin story that's different than anyone else's that I've heard. He started out in a local film commission office, which is a cool tip and idea for anyone that wants to work in entertainment that doesn't live in Los Angeles. He had some great behind-the-scenes stories from making movies like Iron Man 1 back in the day, and I think you are going to enjoy my conversation with David Grant. All right, I'm here with David Grant, the Vice President of Physical Production for Marvel Studios, and also Little League Dad extraordinaire.
Well, not so extraordinary since we barely made the playoffs.
Yeah, so David and I mixed our kids played on the same Little League together, and we were having like an end of the season pizza party kind of thing, and I noticed that you had your Avengers like swag, hoodie thing on, and I was like, oh, did you work on the Avengers? And one thing led to another, and I was like, come be on my podcast. And
yeah.
You're nice enough to agree. So thanks for coming over.
Well, thanks for having me. I feel honored being here.
Well, so let's start at the beginning. Where are you from, and how'd you end up in LA?
Oh my gosh. Everybody you talk to ends up in LA via a different route or path.
Yeah.
I basically grew up in Florida. I call Florida my home. I was born in Pennsylvania, migrated to Florida with mom moving multiple times over my youth. Mm-hmm. So grew up in Daytona Beach and then went to college in Orlando and stayed in Orlando for, quite a few number of years until I ended up coming to LA so much I finally just threw in the towel. And
what were you doing for work in Orlando?
I was working on film productions.
Oh, okay.
But what I would do is I would hang in Orlando, but I'd always have to be on the road.
Right.
Because most films are not made in Florida.
Sure.
Occasionally they had a scattering of films that come through, but it was a great leaping off point for me because that's where I started. And then from there, I would basically travel all around the country wherever the work went.
Did you go to school for film, or how did you originally get into the production side of things?
I did. By default, almost, I had to figure out what I was doing with my life. and I ended up with an associate's degree at an undergraduate school in Orlando. And then I was running out of courses to take in the undergraduate school, and I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? So then I transferred to a 4-year state college, University of Central Florida, and they were just burgeoning and starting to grow their film production program there. So I started panicking, running out of these courses, and I said, I got to choose something. I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And I was sort of, I didn't really have a mentor or a guide to help me. I sort of swam and struggled through a lot of it on my own, which, again, by itself is interesting. But so I enrolled at University of Central Florida, and a couple years later, I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Film and Television.
Nice. And so, like, upon graduation, were you finding it easy to get, like, jobs on set? Like, what kind of jobs were you working at the beginning?
I think I actually got very, very lucky. I somehow got hooked up with the Orlando Film Office. I'm digging deep into memories now because I haven't thought about this stuff in years. So I somehow hooked up.
Like the Film Commission.
Yeah,
like every state for people that don't know, like usually every state, often countries have these film commissions, and it's kind of, it's an office. It's usually funded by the government that they are in charge of like bringing productions into the state or the city because it's good for the economy and local businesses. They'll help liaison between productions, helping them connect with local workforce, local vendors, like that kind of stuff. So you linked up with the Orlando Film Commission.
I did. It in fact, if she ever listens to this program, and again, we're going back quite a few decades now, the film commissioner in Orlando at the time, her name was Kathy Savino. I really don't remember how I got my foot in the door there. But I remember I was going to college, my last semester in college. I was going to school, I think, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And somehow I had Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays free. And in those days I was free, I would go into the Orlando Film Office. Of course, it was an unpaid internship at that point. And my recollection is that it was days way before any digital system existed. And one of my key tasks was trying to organize all the location photos for all what might attract filmmakers to come to Orlando. We don't do that now. It's all digital. It's a lot easier. But just these manila folders with posted up photos that had to be filed in some sort of system. And I remember that was one of my key tasks.
So you would just like mail out stuff probably, like with like photos and stuff that was like, hey, come shoot in Orlando or something like that? Or they'd look at a bulletin board or...
My recollection at that time is usually the location scouts and location managers would come into the office.
Gotcha.
We'd start pulling photos for them to look at.
Gotcha.
And
so analog, so old school.
Way old school. Way old school. In fact, those negatives for those pictures, I'm sure, are long gone. And they've probably been reshot a million times digitally by now anyway.
Sure. So you started working at the Film Commission, and then you graduated, and then you started working on movies and stuff, or what were you doing?
Yeah, so somehow from there, either somewhere within that last semester of college, it was just a stroke of luck. There was a tiny little film that had landed in Orlando. They were kind enough to engage me as basically an office production assistant.
Nice.
They were shooting what we called in those days 6-day weeks, which meant Monday through Saturday. So I transitioned from the Film Commission, the local Orlando Film Office, and landed in the production office of this movie affectionately known at the time as Ernest Saves Christmas.
Oh, I loved Ernest as a kid. I loved Ernest. I watched all the Ernest movies when I was a kid.
I know I'm particularly aging myself by even saying this now, but at the time, kids did love the character Ernest.
Yeah.
He was based out of Nashville, and they ended up, I think, making 4 movies. I think the very first one was Ernest Goes to Camp.
Yeah.
See, okay, there you go. So the
Ernest
second
Saves
one,
Christmas.
Yeah, the second. So so the production office engaged me, hired me, and I came in and worked on basically Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, which is unheard of that they would actually do that. But then I had another college friend that he would come into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays while I was going to school. So we sort of tag teamed. And plus, at that point, I was super cheap labor.
Right.
Basically willing to just somehow, some way get in there and meet people and get a little practical experience outside the school experience.
Do you remember what? I won't ask you what year this was, but do you remember like what the like beginning rate that you were making like as an office PA on that movie was?
Oh, I know very well.
Yeah.
Because here's the backstory to that. I was also going to college, and I was working as a waiter at a very high-end restaurant in Orlando, Florida, all through college. And dare I say, it was 8 years of college and that's a very long story too. But I had to work, and as a waiter in this high-end restaurant, fine dining restaurant, my tips were huge.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, it wasn't as clean and tracked as it is now, as far as the wages and
right.
Gratuities go. So by taking this job as a production assistant in the Ernest Saves Christmas production office, I basically took a drastic pay cut. So much so, yes, and I do remember it was $50 a day.
$50 a day. Wow.
$50 a day I was making. Yep.
Wow. I think the standard PA rate today, which is based on like minimum wage, is like $185 a day or something like that, maybe.
Yeah, it depends upon how many hours you work. Usually, like in our films, we'll guarantee certain hours per day, so it's a little bit higher than that, probably.
Yeah. Awesome. So you started working on Ernest Saves Christmas.
$50 a day.
At $50 a day. Took a huge pay cut from your fancy restaurant, but obviously you saw more of a future in the film side of things, or you wanted to do that instead of just being a career, restaurant waiter?
You have to make those choices because the money was good working at the restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to decide at some point, okay, do I want to continue to work in the restaurant business the rest of my life? Do I take the money hit now and try to make it up and figure it out as I go along? And I decided, okay, let me try this movie thing.
Nice. And so how long were you working in Orlando? You said you worked there for a little while before you moved out to LA.
I don't remember how this next meeting came about, but it was, again, I've had some very fortunate strokes. A lot of it is about timing, right place, right time. And again, through the film production office, there was a producer that had come into Orlando to scout for a movie called Parenthood, Ron Howard's Parenthood.
Yeah.
And this gentleman, he was the executive producer on the film, also the unit production manager. And he was sort of not starting out, but he had been working. I'll go to his story in a second. But he had only done a couple movies as an executive producer. So he needed an assistant for the show. And again, I was affordable, and I was a local hire. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be said there when it's a movie that's got a pretty tight budget. And so I interviewed with him, subsequently was hired with him, and we worked on and produced Parenthood in Orlando, Florida.
Nice.
And then basically from there, the next 20 years of my life were mostly with him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
well,
that's pretty cool.
What is his name?
His name is Joseph Caracciolo.
Joseph
Senior.
Caracciolo.
Senior, yeah.
So you linked up with him and just you kind of followed him through your career, and I'm guessing got promoted and kind of moved up the ladder that way.
Yeah, and again, everybody makes those choices. Again, Joe, thankfully, ended up being one of the most amazing mentors that I've ever had the association of being with. He subsequently, when I first met him, he was living in New Jersey, and so he would go back and forth between New Jersey and head on the road, and then he'd call me, see if I could come wherever he was working, and I did. And a lot of those trips involved coming to Los Angeles. So he himself did not live in Los Angeles at that point. He subsequently, while in Florida, met this wonderful, amazing lady named Holly. Her last name was Levine at the time. They fell in love. He ended up moving to Orlando.
Oh.
So for a while there, it was massively convenient because I would go over to his house and we'd prep the early boards and budgets for all the movies we were getting ready to do. And again, just hitting the road wherever the movie path took us.
Yeah. So for someone that's not familiar with Joseph and his films, what are some of the movies that you worked on with him over the years?
Well, I'd like to... Here's what's funny about career paths with people. Joe was a prop master.
Okay.
So he transitioned from a prop master. Then he worked for a couple shows as a unit production manager and segued into the executive producer / line producer position. Joe was the Joe was the prop master on the Exorcist movie.
Nice.
The original Exorcist movie. And I remember he used to tell these stories about young Linda Blair at that point,
Yeah.
and how he would have to deal with the vomit and that kind of thing. For anybody who hasn't seen the film, there was a lot of practical vomit in those days, which now today would be all visual effects and CGI. But he used to tell tales about working on the set of The Exorcist, and he was at the top of his game as a prop master, and he at some point in his life had to make that decision to transition to another role also.
Yeah.
So he would get these films. I basically followed with him. I was with him officially about 10 years, working strictly as an assistant. So I definitely paid my time and dues, and from there I eventually became a production supervisor on films. And I was a production supervisor for like the next 8 years. Some of the movies we worked on over the course of time, the very first one was Parenthood. Also in Orlando, we actually shot the first My Girl movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember that.
Which is a very touching.
With Macaulay Culkin, right?
That was Macaulay Culkin, and my recollection is he was contracted just prior to Home Alone getting released. And then Home Alone got released, and all heck broke loose with everybody wanting to be around him during the shooting of My Girl.
Yeah.
So from there, oh gosh, I can't remember. We did a movie called Hero, True Colors, Lost in Yonkers, Neil Simon's Lost in Yonkers, the film version of that. We eventually, some of the later films were the first Charlie's Angels with Drew Barrymore and Cameron Diaz.
Nice.
We also did Spider-Man 2 and 3.
Wow.
The first go-round of the Spider-Man movies. Spider-Man 3 was our last film together.
Nice. And so you were his assistant. So what did, maybe just briefly tell me, what did like the assistant duties consist of? Like, what were you doing for the movies?
Well, at that point, again, it was all a lot of prior to digital age. So I'm aging myself, of course. So, of course, there were a lot of rolling phone calls.
Yeah.
A lot of paperwork filing. Basically keeping his life organized, helping him. Joe was very independent. He was not needy in any regards. Again, I was very lucky to be with. I consider myself very fortunate to have been with him all those years. Assistant duties. He didn't really have me do like personal stuff, like run to the dry cleaners or anything like that. It was mainly all work focused.
That's a good assistant job.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic actually.
And then you said you got promoted to production supervisor, and what was that?
That's when you start taking on a lot more responsibility. You start making crew deals. You start having even more budget oversight. You start taking on physical responsibilities, liaising with legal and business affairs, labor relations. That starts your path in conjunction with Joe, who, of course, he was also the UPM, so I directly reported to him at that point with his oversight. I mean, again, we had already been together 10 years by that point. And basically, you become a more integral part of the show by taking on a lot more business-type responsibilities.
Right. So where did it go from there? When you parted ways with Joe, that was, how long ago was that?
2007?
2007.
Ish.
Okay.
Like I said, I forgot to do my homework coming into this, so I'm trying to pull some of this out of my head a little bit. But we...
So 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Because my recollection is I finished Spider-Man 3 on a Friday, and then I made one of the most, again, fortuitous, at that time, I was like, what the heck am I doing? I finished Spider-Man 3 on a Friday. I had been on Spider-Man 3 for 2 years.
Wow.
Sony Pictures, which was our unofficial home, we did back-to-back films for Sony, many, like, back-to-back films was for Sony. And from there, after we finished shooting with Spider-Man 3, they wanted somebody to stick around to help all to get through post-production. At that point, it was a huge film. Now, in hindsight, it seems so small to me compared to what we're doing now.
Yeah, right.
But so I stayed on all the way through the post-production process. Joe went away through a lot of it, but then we kept doing additional photography pickups for the film. So he'd go back to Florida for a while. I'd stay back in L.A. I'd hold down the fort. I'd be scheduling the actors for their ADR, additional dialogue replacement sessions, just helping keep things going in post-production because we kept continually having additional photography trying to make the film better, which is not an unusual process. So I finally finished that on a Friday. I went in and I did a cold interview on Iron Man 1. And I was subsequently hired on Iron Man 1 in the capacity of production supervisor. And at that point, I was thinking to myself, what am I doing? Why am I not taking any time off? Because as a freelancer,
right,
you get to plan your life. You can plan vacations and time off and downtime and just basically reboot yourself. Because the work we do is actually quite taxing in a lot of regards, especially with time and commitments. So I finished Spider-Man 3 on Friday, started Iron Man 1 on the following Monday. And again, it just turned out to be one of the most fortuitous moments of my life. From there was an executive producer on the film named Louis D'Esposito, who now is the co-president of Marvel Studios. So I worked on Iron Man 1, and then I had a tiny little break, and my last freelance film was Fast and Furious.
The first one?
No, that one was called The Fast and the Furious.
Oh, right.
This was number 4, which...
Right, I remember that. They took off the thes.
Right.
And that was the rebrand, Fast and Furious.
I was thinking to myself at that time, this is going to be one of the most confusing things in the whole wide world. But The Fast and the Furious was a pretty huge hit.
Yeah.
Then there was 2 and 3. I can't remember what their titles were.
Fast and Furious 2 and... I can't remember.
Yeah, Too Fast, Too Furious. Oh,
yeah.
Tokyo Drift was number 3.
Yeah, my wife and I, we actually watched all of them like consecutively over the course of a month, and so we're caught up now, and we're big fans of the franchise.
Oh, you're kidding!
But I do forget which movie's which and what the names
it was
are.
Too Fast, Too Furious.
Yeah,
and then Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, and there was. Again, pardon me for expressing this, but there was a quality starting to decline in the sequels, which is not uncommon. So my recollection is Vin Diesel made a guest appearance in Tokyo Drift at the very end of the film, leading to Fast and Furious, where, again, he was the lead of the film.
Right, that was kind of the reboot of the franchise.
It was the reboot, and now...
It's massive.
Now they're, 9, I think, is done, and now they've got spin-offs. Hobbs and Shaw are spinning off.
I'm excited for that one.
It's amazing what that has turned into.
Yeah, and you did the same role on Fast and Furious, the production supervisor?
Yeah, I did, and that was with a new executive producer. Basically, our industry and what folks really need to learn, and it's key, it's about the people you meet.
Yeah.
It's a heck of a lot of networking, because somebody on Iron Man 1 had recommended me to the executive producer for Fast and Furious. So I ended up going to Fast and Furious, starting the show. In fact, Sarah White, she is one of my best friends. She was the unit production manager on Iron Man 1, and I think she recommended me for Fast and Furious. Subsequently, I joined Fast and Furious, and I started out with the executive producer, and we're trying to navigate how to build the film early on. And then we needed another supervisor person, a unit production manager. So Sarah White from Iron Man came and joined Fast and Furious.
Right, so she recommended you for the job, and then you kind of helped get her a job.
She didn't need my help getting jobs. She did not need my help, but Sarah needed a little coaxing to come back and play with us again, if you will. So she came back on, and then again, it turned into like this great experience moment for me, because I had started working on these larger movies with Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3 and Iron Man, but I'd never really segued and spun off into second unit. So on Fast and Furious, I basically hopped over to second unit and oversaw second unit, which was just phenomenal.
Well,
it was
explain
a great
that to me, because I work in reality television, and I see the credits at the end of the movie. It's like second unit director, this and that. And I always imagine that was like there would just be a second crew that maybe the director wasn't with, that's maybe shooting B-roll, or maybe like but maybe explain to me, what exactly is second unit?
Predominantly, it's heavy action intensive, possibly visual effects intensive. It's a unit where you don't necessarily want your first main unit actors. This is where you're using their doubles to perform actions that, again, we don't want to call them dangerous, but they're a little riskier, and you don't want to risk your lead actor getting injured. So you typically will engage stunt doubles. And from there, because a movie needs to be made concurrently, it's too much time for first unit to also shoot the second unit. So typically, in this case, those movies are all about cars and car stunts, and so we were doing a lot of night work. I remember I was on, I think, a month of nights. There was a whole night sequence that was shot in Los Angeles, downtown LA. So basically, second unit takes over for the stunts and action and physical effects, explosions, that kind of thing. But it's all steered from the first unit director. Everybody gets into a room, and the producers of the film sit down and figure out, okay, first unit's going to shoot this portion of the film. We'll get the moments with our lead actors, but then we're going to cut to this shot of the car flipping and spinning over. And so second unit is going to go out there and shoot that piece of the pie with the car flipping and spinning out, spinning out of control.
Gotcha. So second unit shoots all the fun stuff, pretty much.
It can be more fun. It can be, yes.
So you did second unit on Fast and Furious.
Yep.
In like a different role, or was it still the kind of production supervisor?
I was the production supervisor on second unit specifically.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yep.
But then it sounds like we're getting up to the point where you got LinkedIn and got staffed at Marvel, or is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did it happen?
And again, it's all about networking and staying connected with folks that you've met previously. Louis D'Esposito was the executive producer on Iron Man 1. Subsequently from there, Marvel Studios was just a twinkle in Marvel's eye at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided, we're going to try this. And so they started off with The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 1. Iron Man 1 made it to the theaters first, followed by Incredible Hulk. So from there, Louis transitioned into the role of the studio head, working with Kevin Feige, who is now an amazing legend in his own regards.
Yeah.
So Kevin is the president of Marvel Studios. Louis is the co-president. Kevin was actually in a very junior role on the Spider-Man movies.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I've known him for a very, very, very long time. But basically, I came to Marvel via a phone call from Louis one day. He said, "Hey, we're needing staff. Would you be interested in something like this?" And I, again, was thinking hard and long about it. You know, the grass is always greener.
Mm-hmm.
My thinking at that point was, okay, I'll go in. I'll try it 6 months. And so I did. I went in. I met a couple people at Marvel, and they were kind enough to engage me. And 6 months went by, and now it's 11 years.
I've been working in production for over a decade now, and anytime I'm staffing up a show, I'm always on the lookout for good, competent PAs. And with PAs, you really never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you hire someone and they're amazing, and other times you hire them and they suck. I've often thought, what if there were a class that taught people how to be a PA and then could refer those people to jobs once they finish the program? Well, guess what, guys? It exists. It's called PA Bootcamp, and it's a 2-day in-person training program where they will teach you everything you need to know about being a production assistant. How to handle yourself on set, how to use a walkie-talkie, how to read a call sheet. If you are serious about getting into film production, you have to go to PA Bootcamp. No school, no class, no website gets you into the door like PA Bootcamp does. You can check out their website at www.pabootcamp.com. There's a video for you to watch about the program. If you have any questions, you can also email them at pabootcamp@yahoo.com. The next session is June 8th and 9th in Los Angeles, so go to their website and sign up now. Now, let's get back to the show. And this was your first, staff position, right?
I want to call it my first real job ever.
Your first real job.
My first real job
You
ever.
were freelancing, bouncing around between movies,
Yeah.
working on set and everything. And this is I'm assuming the job with the salary and the benefits and the paid time off and everything that, did you have any reservations as a freelancer being like, I'm going to be locked down to this one job? What was your thought process?
Well, that's where I went to the 6-month thing. I'm going to try it for 6 months, see what happens. One of the things you lose as a freelancer, again, is those blocks of time off. Like if you want to head, like yourself right now, if you want to take your boys and head to Europe for a month and you're not, you know you've got a show that's about to wrap, you can actually schedule that and plan it.
Yeah.
That's one aspect of it that you lose.
Right.
So that was the hardest. I think that was the hardest part of it, just adjusting to a full-time real job.
Yeah. And what was your title when you first started there? 11 years ago?
Actually, same title I have now, Vice President of Physical Production.
Vice President of Physical Production.
No forward movement. No, I'm kidding about that. But no, my title has not changed.
Gotcha. So I just looked you up on IMDb before you came in, and it looks like you have a credit. You've worked on pretty much every Marvel movie that's come out since Marvel movies were coming out. I mean, for the most part, right?
Yep.
So what do you do? You're the Vice President of Physical Production for these massive movies that have ridiculously high budgets and long shoot schedules and make a ton of movie at the box office. I'm assuming you're one of like many people that work on the films, but like, so what do you do for the movies?
I officially, in one simple sentence, I'm physically and fiscally in charge of oversight of the film from beginning to end. There are very few people outside of the studio, in fact, outside of the director, that are actually associated with a film from beginning to end. And Marvel Studios is a little bit different because we do everything in-house. We have an amazing team led by Kevin Feige and his creative team, and they develop every project in-house. A lot of film studios, producers bring project to the studios, they decide to make it, so the studio basically doesn't develop the project.
Right.
So from the inception, I'm one of those few people who are there from the very, very beginning, before the script's written, before the outline is done, before the directors are hired, and we start talking about projects years in advance. What's the most effective way to do these films? Where are we going to make them? What makes the most sense logistically? Taking it around the world, keeping it in town, weighing all those options. So
right.
I'm part of that team that helps make all those decisions to determine where a film is made. And then subsequently, I'm part of the team that helps hire the department heads, look for department heads, curate some of the crew, if you will, and then have a huge amount of budgetary oversight.
Gotcha. So are you the one that's actually like putting numbers in the lines of the budget and moving things around and like looking at how, like, tracking costs as it's being spent and everything, and reconciling the budget with what's actually spent and stuff?
Again, I want to qualify that where it's never like one individual doing any of those jobs. I'm part of a team of folks that actually do that. In this case, the budget basically does start on my desk. We figure out, okay, the talent's going to cost this much, the second unit's going to cost this much, travel costs are going to be this. So start putting all those together, and eventually we do hire an executive producer on every film, and that's the only outside producer that we actually bring in on a film, is the executive producer, also known as the line producer. So I help also curate that person, find that person for each of our films, and bring them on board. And they are like directly on the film, the person in charge of oversight of the film, and but I also am a co-producer on the films I work on, so I'm their hands-on. We're very hands-on at Marvel.
Yeah, wow. So I mean, God, I have so many questions. Just crafting a budget and for something like this, at what stage of the film does that begin? So let's we'll talk about an imaginary movie. Let's say we're gonna make Iron Man 8 or whatever. So it's like, all right, so Iron Man 8 is in development. At what stage do you and your team step into it, and like what's the process as far as like building a budget and like starting to make it practical and like actually come up with the steps of like how we're going to shoot this movie?
Well, we try to get in there pretty early when an outline and the story is being developed. The idea generation from our creatives at Marvel is amazing. They are very, very good at hiring these amazing writers that, again, just so good at putting pen to paper and coming up with these great ideas. So from the outline, we start developing, like, okay, we know this set is going to be huge. We need this spaceship, say, like in Guardians 1. We know there's going to be spaceships involved. So we start, okay, spaceship to build. This kind of spaceship will be this, X cost if we do, but then they're going to need a small space pod that comes out of that ship. How much is that going to cost?
But even that, how do you know how much a spaceship costs to build?
At this point, again, I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to have just a ballpark idea based on past experience.
Right, like this many construction workers, a set designer, art department, kind of put it all together that way.
We're also very, a lot of it starting out is about networking. Like you call your friends, hey, what'd you guys spend on construction on that film?
Right.
And then you can start developing general ideas. Construction is one of our largest line items on any budget.
Really?
Because of the sets, yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And these movies have shot all over. Do you guys have like a process or like a way you like to do it? Like, we always shoot, the actor segments in Atlanta, Georgia because of X reason, and the stunts we like to shoot in LA is there like a formula, or is every movie completely 100% different?
We'd like to look at every movie as completely unique and individual, which we do. We try to make, we start with the idea, what makes the most sense for this film? Chris Hemsworth is a native Australian. Mm-hmm. He lives in Australia. We were lucky enough to make Thor Ragnarok in Gold Coast, Australia. And Chris's main house, I'm not going to say the name of the city, people can probably figure it out, but Chris's main home was less than an hour from that studio in Australia.
Nice.
Now, the opportunity for him to be near his family and home for that length of time is just amazing. But it also made sense logistically and financially for the film. We made everything work. Mm-hmm. So you start taking all those factors, and one of our key factors, and it's just part of the reality of making films, is we chase incentives.
Right.
So we'll typically, we have to chase incentives, otherwise there would be no affordable way to even make these films.
Right. Can you explain what that means for people that are listening that maybe don't know how that works, the tax incentives?
There are different countries and even some states, particularly Georgia, Louisiana, that offer tax incentives for you to come and make your film in those locations, because they know that for every dollar we spend, there's a multiplier effect to the local economy of having that film in that geographic location. Some of those tax incentives are automatic, and you don't really have to, they're just part of when you come to a place, i.e. England or Georgia. They offer those tax incentives, so you know you're going to go there. In the case of Australia, they have a base incentive, but then you have to come and approve job qualifications. You're going to create jobs, and they'll give you an additional incentive. And basically, it's like dangling a worm on a hook. They're going to dangle this in front of the films to try to get them to come to their locations.
And then you have to hire like certain percentage of the workforce locally versus like flying them in from LA or New York and stuff like that.
Each state and country has their own nuances. New Mexico, they will offer an incentive only on certain qualified local hires. In the case of England, pretty much every dollar you spend there qualifies.
Yeah. What are you doing during production of a movie? Are you like there on set, like, managing people? Do you spend most of your time in the office, at your desk, like overseeing from afar?
I go back and forth. I used to spend a lot more time at the actual locations, but because of personal life issues, I've tried to reduce my actual time away from home of late. So I will go to a location. I'll be part of the early scout team, basically figuring out, okay, where the heck are we going to shoot this? Is Doctor Strange actually going to be in Nepal? And so we'll be part of those early scout teams, basically developing the logistics of like, okay, what's it going to take to get the crew in and out of Nepal? How are we going to do that? So part of that early idea gestation about where we're going to make a film, and I'm very hands-on with that whole development process of the logistics of it.
Yeah. Do you have like a favorite film or favorite director or any good stories from set that you can share with me?
Oh, gosh. Okay, put me on the spot on that one. Nothing immediately comes to mind. No, sorry. Favorite film? Gosh darn it, I'd have to, in some nostalgic way, Iron Man 1.
Yeah, I mean, it was great, and it kicked off the whole thing. That's why. Are you a fan of the movies?
Oh yeah.
You watch them.
Oh yeah.
And you know all the backstory and the lore and everything like that. Mm-hmm. So spoiler alert: if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame, turn it off now. But
yep.
That's why it was so fitting for me that like it's Tony Stark that dies at the end of Endgame, because he was the one that kicked off this whole decade, 15-year long, however it's been, franchise of all these 30 odd movies or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the Iron Man 1
Yeah, the journey started there, and if that movie hadn't have been successful, especially with Robert Downey, I can share one little story, and I'll leave some names out.
Sure.
But way back in the day, we actually did screen tests with Robert Downey and maybe one or two other folks.
Okay. For the Iron Man role.
For the Iron Man role.
Gotcha.
And so it's like history would probably be so different if that role hadn't have been with Robert.
Yeah.
Who knows where this would have gone?
Yeah. No, I love those stories. There's always there's like those dumb like BuzzFeed articles or whatever that it's like who they wanted for this role and who they got, and it's like those iconic roles where you can't imagine anyone else in that role. Yeah, at some point like the producers were like looking at multiple people, right?
Yeah. Okay, here, I'll tell one semi-boring war story. But on Iron Man 1, when they were screen testing the actors, those screen tests were shot at Raleigh Studios, which is right near Paramount. And I can't remember what the stage number they were on. Flash forward 12 years, 11 years, whatever it is. They're doing additional photography for Endgame. And just by coincidence, that additional photography was at Raleigh Studios again. And I remember getting this phone call from Louis D'Esposito. He's like, David, can you find those call sheets? Can you find that very first call sheet from the screen test? And of course, in those days, we weren't quite as digital as we were. We were just transitioning. But somehow I had scanned all my old documents, and I found the original call sheet where we didn't notate the name of the actors testing for the role. And I printed it out, and Louis and Kevin, they framed it, and they presented that call sheet to Robert Downey on the very last day of additional photography for Endgame at Raleigh Studios, which is where it all began.
Aw, that is a great story. I love that. It comes full circle.
And that was pretty recent. That's the only reason it's still in my head.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah.
You said something when we were chatting at the pizza party that I thought was fun. So you're a fan of these movies, but you don't let your son watch the movies.
Not yet. Not yet.
Now you're making me feel like an awful father because I've let my kids watch every Marvel movie.
No, you know what? Every parent, that's a parent's decision.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I mean, you got to gauge your child. I think right now he's 7 years old. We keep having discussions saying, hey, you know, when you're 8, let's see if you're ready for those kinds of films.
Right.
But no, I've been at our premieres of movies, and I see 3, 4, 5-year-old kids there. Every child is different. Every parent's different. So I just think he's probably not quite ready yet. All his friends that have seen him tell him everything that goes on in them anyways.
You told me a funny story of what he told you the other day.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing that?
No, not at all, because it was the opening weekend for Endgame, and we had just come from the premiere earlier in the week, which was amazing and huge. And he knows he couldn't see the movie, but he knows the characters.
Yeah.
Just by pure exposure from cartoons and all those commercials and advertisements. So he's very aware of all the characters. So he kept asking me who the bad guys were and do the Avengers win or do they lose? And I was always pretty vague with him. And I never, I want him to grow up and one day experience that without having a preconceived notion of what may or may not be coming. So he knows, he has a vague idea of what I do, and somehow I'm associated with these movies, and he would try to get it out of me about what happens, and I was like, no, I'm not going to tell you. So the movie opens on Friday afternoon, and then I think we had a baseball game that next day, Saturday. So he's in the cage. He's got ants in his pants. He's, between when they're not in the field, and he Dad, come here. And he pulls me down, and he goes, the Avengers win and Tony Stark and Black Widow die. And I was like, who told you that? He goes, one of my friends. I said, okay. I said, well, I'm not going to confirm or deny any of that.
Right? You have such a different approach than my wife and I, because we saw it. We went on opening night. We saw Endgame opening night because we wanted to see it before them, just to make sure it wasn't too scary. And the decision we made, we are going to let them watch it, but just not in the theater because we think it might be a little too intense. We'll put it on at home, But so the next day, they're like, they knew we were going, and they're like, "What happened? Tell us the story of the movie. Tell us what happened." And we're like, "You don't want to know. Like, you want to watch it. Well, it'll be on Amazon Prime in 3 months. We'll show it to you then." They're like, "No, what happened?" And so we actually gave them the full recap of the entire movie, just like, and then like they had to go back in time to go on a time heist and like find the stones, whatever. And they were like just rapt, just listening to like every word, and like they were watching it play out. And I think I told you before, like for the in battle sequence, we were like, and then because Hulk snapped his fingers, all the other heroes came back, and Doctor Strange opened a portal from Wakanda, and Black Panther came out, and they're like, yeah, like screaming in the back of the car.
Oh wow, that's great. That's great. Get them jazzed up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is like it's such a phenomenon, and these movies have made such an impact culturally, and just these are going to be the stories and the sort of, the lore that our children live with for the rest of their lives. It's pretty cool.
I'm a little bit older than you are. And when I was growing up, the movies that I think I would equate in that kind of anticipation and excitement were always the James Bond films. I couldn't wait. Growing up, I couldn't wait for the next James Bond movie to come along.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I would say it was more like Star Wars, like when the Star Wars movies were in the theaters when I was younger, and it was just like, that phenomenon, obviously, which is still around. Like they're still making those movies too.
Well, hopefully we'll be around for quite a while also.
Yeah. Well, that actually makes me think of another question, because Star Wars, obviously got bought by Disney. Marvel got bought by Disney. Did things change for you at all when that acquisition happened?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all. Again, I was very, very fortunate. I've been at Marvel Studios, the feature film arm of Marvel, since basically the inception.
Yeah. From
freelance on Iron Man 1 and then eventually joining staff on Iron Man 2. I came in on Iron Man 2 on staff. The only vivid memory I have is I remember one day Bob Iger coming down to Manhattan Beach. At that point, we were set up in Manhattan Beach as our home base. And it seems like such a small group now. There were maybe 20 to 30 Marvel Studios employees at that point. And I remember they set up folding chairs on the stage, and Bob Iger came into the stage to announce what was about to happen. And I don't know why. It's a pretty vivid memory, because it's just like, okay, well, how is that going to affect us? In hindsight, Disney is amazingly supportive. And we're basically, because of the key talent we have, starting with Kevin Feige, we're basically left to our own devices. We have quite a bit of autonomy, and hopefully by now they trust us to do the best we can with these.
I mean, you guys are doing pretty well. You got a pretty good track record.
Yeah. Let's hope that continues.
So where does it go from here? And I know obviously creatively, there's you're not going to tell me where the characters are going, but like I guess just on like a bigger picture scale, like these superhero movies have been such a big thing, and a lot of people talk about superhero fatigue, because it's like on TV and it's like every big movie that comes out is a superhero. What is the studio's plan, or just where do you think personally like it's going to go from here as far as the type of movies that Marvel Studios is making, or just superhero movies in general?
Here, that comes up quite a bit, superhero fatigue. But here's my personal thoughts on that. Romantic comedies have been around since the inception of film, the 20s, the 30s. They're still making romantic comedies. Spy detective films, they really burgeoned in, say, the 40s. They're still making those in some regard or the other.
Right.
So action films. You can define any genre, and that genre is still around. So I think we just became a new genre that will hopefully continue eternally. Yeah.
I mean, I hope so. I think the same way about reality TV, because that's my business is reality TV. And like it obviously, it exploded onto the scenes in the early 2000s, and it was, like this massive, like new flashy thing with like Survivor and Big Brother, and then all those spinoffs and everything. And then a few years into it, people were like, oh, this is a fad. This is going away. People aren't going to be watching this forever. And obviously the bubble settled, but now, I mean, it's just another genre of entertainment that I hope is not going anywhere. And
it's part of the landscape on television.
Yeah.
I still I still watch Amazing Race.
Yeah, I love Amazing Race.
I love that show. And
Yeah.
they're on, season 21 now. I don't know what they do, two seasons per year or something?
Yeah.
I can't keep track. I just know my DVR automatically records it, and I get a smile every time I get to sit down and turn on an episode.
Yeah, it's a great show.
Yeah.
I actually interviewed one of the producers from that show on this podcast, one of the early episodes. His name's Mike Miller, but he worked on like the first 16 seasons or something like that.
Wow.
As one of the challenge producers, making up all the games and challenges that they do throughout. So
See, I'm watching the show, and my brain is always spinning about, okay, if this person wins this leg, but then they have these flight equalizers that get everybody back on. And I remember one season there was a team 3 days ahead. I keep thinking about all those logistics because that's part of my nature of what I do.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, okay, that team finished 3 days in front of the other team, but you got to keep that story and cameras rolling for the next 3 days, knowing that they're not winning.
Yeah.
And just all the logistics of the passports, the flights, the visas of taking those teams around the world. It's horrible, but I do think about that stuff.
No, I mean, to me, that's one of the most impressive things about it, is just logistically how they do it. But yeah, you should listen to that episode, Mike Miller, because he talks all about that and just like how they move their teams through countries and leapfrogging and this and that. It's really interesting. So.
Yeah, hiring local crews wherever they are, I'm assuming. I don't know if those cameramen travel with the teams. I don't know, but again, it's a pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive what they do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, is there anything that, and I know Marvel's very secret, anything that's upcoming that it has been announced or that you can talk about? Like, what are you guys working on now?
Any minor league internet sleuth can probably figure out what our upcoming features are. But in conjunction with those upcoming features, which I can't officially announce, because we're not going to do that, I think, until Comic-Con. We obviously are in prep and pre-production on quite a few different projects. But in conjunction with that, I think one of our proudest moments is we're also going to be jumping into the limited streaming pool, limited streaming series based upon our film characters. So those have been publicly announced, and right now I was part of the team that was helping basically figure out how we're going to start pulling all those together. Where are we going to shoot these? How are we going to shoot them? And that kind of thing. So right now we have 3 streaming series that are in prep. One is called WandaVision, one is called Falcon and Winter Soldier, and the third one is Loki. Those have been publicly announced. So Marvel Studios, for the first time, people get confused because Marvel Studios is a separate entity from Marvel. Marvel Television and Marvel have all these other different divisions, comic books, consumer products, television shows, all those other Marvel entities you see on different channels, whether it be Netflix, Hulu, or otherwise, were produced by Marvel Television and not Marvel Studios.
Right. I think I told you I had one of the heads of development for Marvel Television on this podcast, and he also said you guys are just completely separate.
Yeah, we don't really commingle.
Yeah.
And again, I want to say most of that is fairly organic by the shapes and needs of the creative products. And I think it did help Marvel Studios focus specifically on building the best feature films they can. Mm-hmm. But we're taking our lead characters from the feature films, and they're going to be in limited streaming series that are going to be on the Disney streaming service coming up at the end of 2019. I think it rolls out, but our shows won't start hitting Disney Plus until the end of 2020.
Gotcha. And limited streaming service meaning like an 8-part series that's not necessarily going to be like, there's not going to be a season 2 of it, like a True Detective or Fargo or something like that.
Yeah, those are perfect examples. And again, that's another new genre that, say, 10 years ago didn't even exist. 10 years ago you had TV series that, with the hope and expectation that year after year they would continue and just become a recurring series. I don't know if maybe our attention spans we want a more focused. It's an intenser period because you don't get to spend years with these characters, but you still want to be attached to them, but in a shorter time frame.
Yeah.
But it also gives you an opportunity to tell, again, focused, intense stories in a short period of time.
Is the production process for like an 8-10 part limited series similar to that of a feature film, or how is it different?
In our case, yes.
Yeah.
We are engaging the same methodology on the streaming series. A lot of streaming series, a lot of network television they have a different director for every episode.
Right.
A different assistant directing team with each of those episodes. We are, because it is meant to be one continuous story for one season, we're going to go with one director, one team that sees the film through, and we're going to shoot all the days concurrently. And instead of making a 2-hour feature, it'll end up being, say, 6 1-hour episodes.
Right. Very cool. Well,
we're just going to have to shoot a lot more material every day than we do on a feature film schedule.
Very cool. Well, I look forward to seeing that. Yeah. Where do you go from here? You've got the best job in the world, it sounds like. Are you going to retire from Marvel 20 years from now and get your gold watch and Captain America shield and sail off into the sunset? Or do you have like bigger visions of grandeur? What are you doing?
I'll go back to the original thought of I was trying Marvel for 6 months.
Yeah.
At this point, my hope and expectation would be I'll see the rest of my years there.
Yeah. Wow.
If all goes well. I don't. Again, most of us in the production field that have a good reputation or a good experience level, there are people constantly knocking on our doors. But you know what? I'm very, very happy where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, you do good work. You make good movies. Yeah. You're changing the world with story.
Well, I don't really dive into the story portion of it so much. That's our amazing creative team that does that portion.
Well, you're part of the team. You're as they say on the Disney lot, you're part of the magic.
There would be that. Yeah.
All right, well, Dave, thank you so much for coming in.
All right.
I really enjoyed chatting with you.
All right, Jeremy. Thank you.
All right, that was my chat with David Grant of Marvel Studios. Thank you guys so much for listening. As I mentioned before, I am going on hiatus so I can make Vanderpump Rules Season 8. It's been a great time, a good run. I've had some great guests, and I really do appreciate you guys listening to the show and all the feedback I've been getting over these past several months. I will be back in the fall with more episodes. Please go on to subscribe to the podcast so you know when I start publishing again. Also, do me a favor, rate the show. Leave a review. It is so helpful of just getting it out there and getting it into more people's ears. If you want to reach me, I'll still be checking my emails and Instagram. It's show, SHOW, at workingclasshollywood.com, or you can find me on Instagram at workingclasshollywood. Thank you guys so much again, and I will see everyone back in the fall.